I've always loved the sound of the guitar. Probably because I grew up with the sound. My father was a musician. And guitar has always been a big part of my life, even though I regrettably never learned it myself. But luckily, there are a lot of sample libraries out there that can help you with it, even though it's very difficult to get an acoustic sounding guitar, especially to sound right. But Virtue has created one of the best sample libraries out there, the Acoustics. It's quite an old library now, but I still think it sounds the best. So when they sent me a review copy of the new library called Apollo 2 Cinematic Guitars, I was instantly intrigued. So here's a review for you of that library. Hello there, this is Sam with Second Tier Sound. Really nice to see you here. If you're new here, I create videos on how to create music within your DAW, but also how to get the most out of your virtual instruments, going a little bit deeper so you really can master the instruments. So, Virtue's latest product, the Apollo 2 Cinematic Guitars, recently was sent to me by them. They wanted me to make a review. I do want to say though, they're not sponsoring me and they have no say in what I say about this product. So let's go into this and first start with what it sounds like. Even though the Apollo 2 carries itself really well, it doesn't really need other instruments in order to shine, I still recommend that you have some structure. So I'm going to do that myself by starting with the piano. I might not need it later, but at least I know a little bit where I'm heading, what chords I'm using. Now, I do want to try this without the piano in the beginning, just to have an intro as well. It's easy to follow the chords, but Apollo 2 also sounds really nice when it just has one drone that goes on. It's really flexible that way. Well, let's start and see what we can come up with here. All right, that works pretty well. Let's add some instruments that actually change chords. Let's just add a little bit of distortion as well so we can have a little bit more sort of climax, more power at the end. I think we need just a bass as well. There are some bassier sounds in Apollo, so you don't actually need it, but I just want to add some oomph to this. And then I think we are pretty much done. I also briefly wanted to mention that this instrument comes in two parts, you could say. One ambient designer and then an instrument part that's actually called instrument. I will go into detail a little bit later what that really means. There are also a bunch of patches and presets, So there's a lot to this whole instrument. Anyway, let's listen to a few of those sounds and then go a little bit deeper into the interface. I wanted to show you a few sounds from the instrument part. In general, I really like the quality here. So let's listen to some of the sounds here from the different sections. In motion, we can try... Really creative sound design here. You can do a lot with guitars. Let's try another one here. So really nice moving pads, you could say. Let's go to the pad section and let's try... So these sounds, they work better as pads, I find, in general. Okay. All right, let's take a look at some of the plucked sounds. Let's try another one here. All right, let's try another one. All right, let's try some of the split keys. These are basically patches that divide the keyboard into different sounds. These are great starters for a design. You have two sounds, very simple, but it really gives you a lot of emotion. Let's try a few other ones here. Yeah, there you have beginning of a movie. All right, let's try a few swells as well. All right, very nice. And then we have Mysterium. Very nice. Lots of good sounds here that you have to try yourself if you get the instrument. Then there are also some swells with mod wheels, and they have done basically what I do, is that I match the volume to my modulation wheel. So you have more of control of swelling it yourself. Let's try another one. Yeah, so I'm swelling in and out with the mod wheel. Let's try one more. So lots of great lush pads that you can add to the Ambient Designer. Let's take a deeper look into the Apollo 2 interface. And it's very colorful and pretty and well laid out. Maybe at first glance it's a little bit overwhelming, but as you will see soon, it's not difficult at all. You might see here that there are lots of colors down here at the keyboard, and you will see that they all represent the different sections here, or different engines as they call it. How do you actually use the engine? Well, let's look at this yellow section here. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different samples. Here are some of them. And they're actually quite long, not just one bar. They go on for a bit, depending on the sample. So you can obviously choose whatever you like here. There's a lot of sounds, but one thing I want to point out that these are not individual sounds. They're actually sets of sounds. So each one you select here, you get 6 sounds to choose from. And that is how all these sections work. My recommendation is that you actually go around and choose the sets that you want for your project and then create your own sound. There are obviously a lot of really nice presets up here that you can play with to give an idea what you actually can do. So I recommend trying that too, but most of the time I would say it's better to create your own sound by selecting what fits your project. So what is the blue keys here then? Most samplers that play ready-made WAV files, they have a problem. As soon as you lift the key, the samples stop playing and it doesn't sound very smooth. I'll show you what I mean. And I'd lift the keys and it just goes away and it's not very smooth. And if you want to do that, you have to sort of bounce it out, put an effect on, perhaps do a fade out, or just hide it somehow. Virtue has done something quite simple but still brilliant, is that they have added a bunch of different ending samples that I can hit. And as soon as I hit any of these blue keys, the previous sample is turned off and it goes into ending. Now, these ending samples are not always the same. They fit the set of samples that I have chosen. Very simple, but very effective and saves a lot of work. Let's talk a little bit about this green section, and you probably have figured this out. These are the chords. So we have about 2 octaves of chords here. Right now we're in D major, but it's not just major chords. You can also click this one and choose minor chords. For example, and I hit this minor key, and now it sounds like a minor chord. Obviously, some of these chords you won't hear change between major and minor, and that is because they play only the root note or the 5th. But there's something else that is really clever about this system here. Let's hold down a pattern, and let's click on one of these. And you see nothing happened, right? Why is that? Well, it won't happen until I trigger the sample again. So I change, and I hit the key, and it changes. That means I can have some samples playing, and then maybe I add another one, like this. Maybe I want that second sample to actually sound different. Or maybe I want it to be in minor. So that way I can actually create more interesting sounds than just major and minor triads. And then I can also have a top line that doesn't change even though the underlying chords does. So here's the top line. And the chords underneath. And this is extremely important. If you can only just change the chords of all the samples, it will normally sound very unnatural and very abrupt. So here that you can actually have some more kind of voice leading in a way is absolutely important. Let's talk about more of the controls here. It's very straightforward to have the volume and pitch and pan, but there are a couple of things here I recommend you try out. I've noticed there is no real expression layer, no way of fading the sounds in and out with the mod wheel, for example. So what I would do is to right click here on the volume, learn MIDI CC automation, and then use a controller. So then you can actually fade the sounds in and out. And also you don't have to choose all of these. You can do it, for example, only with the sounds that you want to have a fade in and out, and the other ones are not touched. Okay, pan is very important because these are 5 different sounds in one engine, so you can spread them out. You can put maybe one a little bit to the right and one a little bit to the left like this, and then you can have more mixed picture the way you want it. One thing we can add here is that down here, you can add your own output. You can have this one to stereo 1, stereo 2, and they will be different channels in your DAW. And that way you can obviously apply your own effects and change the sound the way you want it if you prefer to work that way. In fact, a lot of these sounds are actually dry. So that means there are no effects on, and then you can apply your own. So you can do both ways. I do really like it though, that it's all in one instrument. I don't have to have 5 different channels, and I don't have to apply a lot of effects. It's all in this package. Also then we have low and high cut. And this is something I want to talk a little bit about, because when you write music, most of us who do this, we know about EQing, but we're not masters at it, and we don't need to be unless you're a mixing engineer or you do mastering. Otherwise, the whole point of EQing most of the time is not to do a bunch of advanced EQ tricks. It's really to just give more space to the instruments. What do I mean? Well, let's say you have more high frequency sound up here, and you have maybe down here a more low frequency sound. And they might sound good together, but sometimes they compete a little bit for the frequencies because they're in the same range. So what you can do then is, for example, this low frequency sound, you can just cut a little bit off the top end here because you don't really need it there, right? You obviously have to listen to the sound and make sure this works. And maybe this sound that has a higher frequency, you can just cut a little bit of the lower end. Now, all you've really done without changing the sound too much is give a little bit more space to both of these sounds. It's a very good concept, but it's so simple and it really works. And I think most of us should think like this when we EQ in general. Now, there's a middle button as well, and that kind of works the same. It's not really a mid-cut, but you can sort of apply a little bit where you want the curve to be in terms of low and high cut. So enough about that. You can do that here, and that's really nice. We also have mute and solo, and then obviously the different outputs. And then you can half the speed of the phrase, or you can double it. And this can be really nice. Let's say we have you can double it. Definitely maybe if you have a lower BPM or a higher BPM and it just doesn't really fit, it sounds too weird. But also you can create new patterns with this way if you mix them together. Sync, if you turn it off, it means it plays the recorded tempo, whatever that was. And sync otherwise matches it to your BPM in your DAW. All right, so that is the edit stage here. Let's go to the LFO stage. Sort of the same thing. We have 5 sections, but now you can affect the LFO. And we can maybe talk more about what LFO stands for. Let's think about it like this. You have different shapes that changes your sound in different ways. Here, for example, we have a sine wave. It will affect the sound this way. What will it affect? Well, the volume in this case. We can select other things. Let's try that. So how much do we want it to be affected? So we have to turn on the amount, the percentage of how much we want. So let's listen to this one. Turn it off. So now the volume is going up and down in this shape, and we can change the speed here a little bit slower. Now it's tempo synced on, so it's gonna give me some note values now, quarter notes, for example. If I turn it off, I can just, use the frequency rate, basically faster and slower. Now, this was just a volume, right? So I can choose maybe pan. Okay, really cool. You have to have headphones on to really hear this effect. But the cool thing here is that there's a lot you can choose, maybe EQing, high pass, distortion, all that stuff. And then you can always right click and do learn MIDI CC automation, and you can control this in your DAW or with your controller rather, and make a lot more variation to the sounds. Okay? And let's take a look at the envelope. And this is really cool. I mean, most of you probably already know what this is, but you're going to learn even more how to use this now. Most samples have this in some sort or another. And this is attack, hold, decay, sustain, and release. And how do I use this? Well, attack is how this sound starts, like. So I can have a slow attack. If I move it up quite a bit, you will see the sound fades in now. Nice. Or I can have a short attack. Starts immediately, right? No problem there. And then the release. That means when I lift the key from the keyboard, it will have a sort of a release. It's the best word, actually. So if I have this normal release, listen carefully. It's kind of fading out just a bit. I lift the key. So it doesn't die immediately, because if it's all the way down, you will hear it cuts much more abrupt. See? That's not so cool. That's what I talked about before, why you need release samples. I can obviously have a much longer one, so when I lift the key, it goes on for a bit. Lift the key. So what is this pad button? Well, if I click this pad button, it will actually create a pad sound, like a synthesizer, here of this sound. It will have a slower attack and a longer release. Listen. So any sound can sort of become more of a synthesizer pad sound in the way it behaves. Let's talk a little bit about these two, or these three, the hold, decay, and the sustain. I think the best way to think about this is sustain is actually volume. And somebody say, not quite. Well, it isn't. It isn't a volume control like before, but you will see more of what I mean. Because if you just move the sustain, you'll see it's talking decibel here. So I'm moving it down. And now if I play the sound, it's a lot softer, right? If I have it full maximum on, full volume. But what is it actually affecting? Well, it has to do with the hold and the decay. If I actually move these now, like this, and I have sustain at maxima, I won't hear any difference. Because I have to change something here, because these two is changing this. I'll show you what I mean. Let's go down to 0 here, right? And let's go down to 0 of these two. We won't hear anything, obviously, because the volume is 0. But let's move up hold. That means it's going to hold the sound a little bit before it goes down to 0. Listen. I'm still holding down the key, by the way. But this hold is up and cut down. Now, you might not like that. You want a smoother transition. So then you're going to use the decay. That basically means how quickly is this going to 0. Okay, so let's have a longer one. I'm holding down the key. And now it's going to, I'm still holding the key. It's going towards 0 in the sustain, but the decay is doing a smoother ride. I can have a faster decay. Yeah, that's kind of quick, right? So it wasn't that good. And obviously, I don't have to go to 0. I can go to like maybe half volume. I can also have no hold whatsoever. Let's have a little bit longer decay. So the decay starts instantly. Yeah, that was quite a long decay. And then we're going also not to 0 volume, but half the volume there. Okay, so make sure that if you want to affect these or use these, then you have to change to sustain. If it is at maximum, you won't hear anything. Attack is for the start, and release is when you lift the key. And that way you can have a little different behaviors of the pads. And remember, you can also always learn the MIDI CC for any of these. Okay, so let's take a look at some more interesting stuff to create even more variety with your sounds. We have the sequence mix down here. And this is actually really cool. And you notice something, suddenly a color came on here. And so it's easier to see which one you're working with. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later. But it's a pretty cool feature. So what can you do here? Well, basically here, you see there are all these different keys that I can play, right? I have this sound, this one, and so on. You can see the one I'm playing, it lights up here. And so now I actually have the option of doing a little mixing here as well. I can say maybe I want this sound a little bit lower than the other one. I want this one to be a little bit more on the right. And this is really nice. So I have more mixing option. I don't have to use everything in my DAW. I can actually use it in Engine. Very, very nice feature. And one of the really cool things here, let's take this sound here. If I click reverse, now it's reverse, which is effectively quite a different sound. So you could say that this reverse button really doubled your sounds in a way. And let's talk a little bit about this thing up here. I think you understand what it is, but basically you can take the pitch or the volume or the pan or the low pass or the high pass. It's a filter, pretty much like this one, or the cry wah-wah, which is most fun. And basically what's going on here, you have to select also this one. You paint something here, and this is what you're gonna hear. Let's try that one. Right, this is very fun. And then you can change the value, how quickly it goes. So eighth note will be a little bit slower. You can also see the amount, how much you actually wanted to apply, and also how many steps, maybe you want fewer. So you have a lot of options here to really mess with your sound. Imagine doing this with the volume, the pan, and the filters, and the wah-wah. And you can do it on all of these different engines individually. So there's a lot of options there. Let's talk about the FX. And this is absolutely fantastic because each of these engines, now you can apply different effects. And there's quite a few. EQ, stereo, distortion, preamp, phaser, compressor, reverb, and delay. A lot of options here. So you don't have to do all this in your DAW. Again, if you prefer that way, obviously you select different channels and you apply your own effects. But it's really nice that it's in here, in-house. So each section, but you can also do a master suite, which has stereo, saturation, EQ, bus compressor, and limiter. So you can really go at it here. Very, very nice. Then we have the browser, and this is a great addition. Obviously, all the sounds exist quite neatly here. They're even grouped into different sections, so it's not that hard to find. I find it a little bit quicker. But the good thing here is that you can actually go for certain sections. So maybe you want the EBO sounds only, and then they're here on the right side. The only bad thing here is that you can't use the mouse scroll. You have to drag it with your mouse pointer up and down. This is not something that is Virtu's fault. This is just how the Contact Engines is made. Okay, so then we have randomizations, which I never really use, but it can be fun to create some new sounds. You just click it, and everything that is selected will then randomize the sound that is. So if I don't want maybe the engine 1 to not be randomized, I'll just unclick that, and everything else will be. All right, and let's look at settings. And this is actually quite important, and also a nitpick that I have, or two rather. So MIDI select here, this is a tool that makes sure that as long as I have browser, effects, or sequence mix on, I will see which I'm working with. If I hit this key, it will tell me with the color, this is what I'm working with. If I hit this key, it will tell me I'm working with that one. And this one, so on. Very, very useful because it can be a little bit confusing in terms of where am I? What control am I going to change? So if I turn this MIDI select off, I won't see those colors. Now, there's one thing here I think is a miss. That is, if you're not in the browser, FX, or sequence mix, you won't see any colors. There's nothing here. Now, you can see here that there's movement because I'm playing. But let's say I'm in the LFO. No movement, no indication whatsoever. It can be a little bit confusing. So if Virtu by any chance is watching this, try to make sure that this MIDI select is working all the time, everywhere. And if you don't want it, you just turn it off. But that would help a lot. And another thing, when you have playback, when something's being played, it should also lit up. And not just one section, but all the ones that are playing. Latch is a really useful thing in this instrument because, it's a big instrument and it's hard to play everything live at the same time. So let's try this. And I can turn it all off with one button, this one here, and I can turn it all on again. And obviously I can just hit the keys that I played one more and they will turn off. Then we have pitch wheel control, and this is great. You can just decide which ones of these engines you want to be affected, and that might be cool. Maybe you just want engine 2 to be affected and the other one's not, then you need to turn them off. And also the range of the pitch wheel. Now, it's a nitpick here that I feel like Virtu should add, and that is an expression control as well. I assume there are no dynamic layers recorded here, and that's fine, but it should be possible to do a fade in and fade out yourself with an expression layer, and it should be done the same way as the pitch wheel. Now, as I said before, you can go in here on the edit and you can select Learn MIDI CC, so you can solve it yourself that way. But I think it should be there, and it would be even cooler if there were a dynamic layer. I realize the library would be a lot bigger then, obviously. But that's a wish I have. I miss that I can't do fade in and out on my own. I can create one here with volume, for example. I do volume and I draw sort of a curve. Or I can do it with controlling the volume here. But otherwise, I think that's a miss. Let's talk about poly and mono as well. This is actually quite good. So if I have the sound here, if it's on poly, I can play any of these sounds together in a set. If I click on mono, I can only play one of these sounds at a time. But not only that, it has a nice transition. Subtle, but it's nice. And I can change this transition time here with the crossfade, so it can be a quicker one, and maybe that's something I want if I have sharper sounds with a quick attack, like a picking sounds, for example. Or I can have a little bit slower crossfade if I have sort of ambient sound, more like pads. Now, let's talk about the Apollo 2 instruments that they also have in this package. And this is actually a really fantastic addition. It's really clever to have this, but there's something I want to say about this. This is not a critique, it's just something I want to mention to you, a tip. I wouldn't really consider this as an instrument, as in a great guitar sound that I can change and use. I would play an acoustic guitar. I would consider it more an addition that really helps the ambient designer, because the ambient designer is pre-recorded phrases, right, that you can't do anything with. But maybe you want to add something, an extra note, an extra chord or something. And then it's really useful to have this Apollo 2 instruments. But what am I talking about? Well, basically, instead of having pre-recorded phrases, you have different sounds that you can play. And here we have 5 sounds, just as before. So. These sounds, even though are really well recorded, are not a good solo instrument. And I don't think that's what they're for, because the guitar needs a lot of different articulations and hammer-ons and slides and all kinds of stuff in order to sound realistic. So here, when you load a sound, it's just one sound, and that sounds very stale very quickly. So my recommendation is that these are more chords or specific notes or adding something to the designer. That's the way I see it. To play this as an instrument, as a normal guitar, that doesn't sound good to me at all. But this is not a critique, because I don't think it's meant that way. There's a lot of things you can do here. So this pretty much looks the same as the other one, but it has 2 additions that the designer doesn't have. It has performance, which is very interesting. Now you can change a lot to the sounds. You can change the kind of velocity. Is it controlled with how hard you hit the keys, or with the mod wheel, for example? This is very clever, because maybe this sound you want to be controlled with the velocity. So you hit it really hard or soft. But this sound, maybe you want to be controlled with the mod wheel. So then that sound won't be affected, even if you hit these keys really hard. You can still have a different velocity going on the different sounds. But not only that, you can also choose the way the velocity curve will work. Now, it's hard to imagine. You have to visualize this in your head. But how hard will it go from soft to loud and stuff like that? This is how you can select that. And also the dynamics, different layers. They have a legato button, and this is a nice feature. Let's see where we're at here. But I think it doesn't always work so well. You can tweak it here, you can have a quicker legato. But don't expect that this legato button is suddenly making the guitar more realistic. No, see it more of a portamento effect. That sometimes can be more or less successful. It's nice that it's there. Then it also has something that is really important actually. That's the keyboard, and that's also new here. And it might seem like a lot, but it's not that difficult. See, we have all those 4 instruments, or 5 rather, here, but they're not limited to this range. You can extend it. So let's take the yellow one here, and we can say it's gonna go from, now it's gonna look blue because the other keys are underneath, but maybe I want this yellow instrument to be all the way to the top. So now, whatever key I hit, I will have this sound, but also the other sounds. So you can see here, you can create layers and maybe a layered sound that has up to 5 instruments at the same time. So you can actually really go at it and decide exactly how you want the keyboard to sound, where the sound's gonna be. There's a lot of possibilities here. And you can also choose the velocity range, how much it's gonna, maybe you want a maximum of 68 velocity here. I won't go over that. No matter how hard you hit the keys, you can change where it's gonna be. You can change your transposition and so on. This is very, very powerful. So I would think this kind of a synth sound, good for pads or additions that you can then add to the ambient designer and get a lot more variety and personalizations of your sound. But my recommendation is to not see it as a guitar that you just play a normal solo melody on top. I personally think that that won't work very well. So let's get to it. What are my conclusions about this instrument? Is it good? Could it be improved? Do I recommend it to you? What about the price? Well, to be completely honest, I really like this instrument. You might say, oh, that's because they sent you a copy. No, it's because I really think it's very good. It is quite pricey, it's boutique pricing, and maybe that is because this is quite niche, but I also think that this is a very, very high quality product. This is not something that they put together last week with some samples. There's really excellent solutions and ideas. It's a complete package. You can do everything in one channel VST if you like to. It really holds its own. You don't need other instruments actually to create a whole landscape. I just think it's important that you understand what this instrument is and that you only get it if you actually need it. I don't want it to be that I talk well about an instrument on my channel and then you all run out and buy that. It is a review that shows you that if you need something like this, then I highly recommend it. If you need it for your production, it's really, really good. But don't just get it because I talk well about it, okay? If you don't need it. That's always been my advice. So what are some small nitpicks? It's about the interface I mentioned a little bit. My biggest gripe is that there's no integrated expression layer or a modulation wheel so I can do a fade in and a fade out in my own way. I can obviously do that by connecting the volume control to my mod wheel, but I would like it to be a dynamic layer, which probably would make this library a little bit bigger, but I think it would be worth it. And then the price, it is pricey. It's on the high side. I hope they have sales now and then. I can understand that most people will think twice before getting this, but it is very, very high quality. That follows the tradition of the libraries that I've seen in the past by Virtu. So then I wanted to say again, I talked about it before, but just to be clear about it, that do understand though that the instrument part of this instrument, I really want to stress that for me, it's really an addition that is very well needed. You can add extra notes, chords, you can do pads, some sound design and all that, but don't feel like, oh, I'm gonna load this guitar and then play around, because it's not gonna sound like guitar. It's not a good guitar instrument. It's a great addition to the ambient designer that really puts it on another level. Anyway, that is my complete review of this library. I hope you learned how to use it, what it is, and if it's good for you or not. Anyway, thank you for sticking through. I hope you enjoyed this review. If you did, feel free to hit the like button, subscribe. You can also become a patron to support me more, or hit my affiliate links below. If you purchase something from these links, then I get a cut from that. Until next time, take lots of care and make sure to write a lot of music.